Which Mariners could significantly alter the course of the team's season? We'll discuss that coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Batnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you so much for making us your first listen, subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. And today we're talking all about swing players, or some call them seesaw players, for the 2024 Mariners. Now, Comrade Colby, what is a seesaw player?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody else use the term seesaw player. Maybe you have, but it's literally because I couldn't think of the word swing player, so I just called him a seesaw player. So I don't know if that's a thing that I just subconsciously know, or if I invented
I feel like
that.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
I'm sure somebody has come up with it. It's kind of obvious. Seesaw player is something that a player who can tilt the balance of your season. He can he can raise you up or he can drop you down depending on how well he plays. So I think we all understand the concept of a swing player. If this player is good, it helps a lot. If this player is bad, it hurts a lot. But they're also typically players who, their production is up in the air. Like, the likelihood that they produce is a little bit up in the air. Like, it's kind of hard to say Julio Rodríguez is a seesaw player because that his low is pretty stable. Like, it's pretty good. Like, that's his low.
It's also too easy to say him
Right.
or Cal or JP.
Sure.
Obviously,
I mean,
a lot of the Mariners' success
right.
rides on those guys.
Sure. So these are guys who there's questions about their production, maybe, or their availability. There's questions, and if they think low, then they could blow up the Mariners season. If they raise up, they can, they could propel them to new heights. So it's kind of, just finding guys whose production will dictate exactly how far this Mariner team can actually go and how many games they can win. So I think we all understand the concept of a swing player.
So I want to start with Dom Canzone, and honestly, we can just talk about the corner outfielders in general. So Mitch Haniger, Luke Raley as well, but I want to specifically focus on Canzone because this offseason, the roster was built in a way that Canzone's roster spot was never really truly threatened. It seems like they're very high on Canzone, and a lot of people have been riding that hype train as well. I mean, like we talked about yesterday, you ask most Mariners fans or people that cover the Mariners, who do you think is going to break out in 2024? A lot of the time, and the answer is Dom Canzone. So let's talk a little bit about Dom Canzone here, Colby. What do you think?
Dom is interesting. By the way, he does Dom or Dominic. He's fine with both, apparently. Little PSA there. Canzone's interesting. Obviously, he's had a nice spring, and he last year when he came up with Arizona, and then when he was traded to Seattle, he certainly flashed a lot of really interesting traits. He's actually a pretty good runner. He runs well. He's not a base stealer per se, but pretty good speed. He has significant power. It is plus raw power and a track record of hitting in the minors at just about every single level. He doesn't strike out a ton. He draws some walks. He's a good looking player. There's a lot of reason for optimism when you look at somebody like Canzone. There's also some red flags, beige flags, whatever you want to call them. For starters, last year, he looked really bad against lefties. Now, he still produced some against them, but the swing is really highly susceptible to breaking balls from left-handed hitters. He kind of gets off balance. He kind of flails. And when he swings and misses, typically it looks pretty ugly. There are some,
and that's still been prevalent this spring as well. Yeah.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't hit lefties. It just means that when he struggles against lefties, it's probably going to look pretty bad. But there are obviously signs here that this is a guy who he has 30 home run power. That's certainly, on the table if he gets enough at bats. He's hit for a high average at every single level he's played in. He didn't strike out last year at the big league level, and he hasn't struck out, pretty much throughout his entire career. So he's going to put the ball in play. He hits the ball hard. He's a pretty good athlete. there's a lot of tools here. There's a lot of, exciting, tantalizing things to dream about with Canzone, but there's also some big questions. As tantalizing as those skills were last year, he didn't hit outside of a couple weeks in August. I mean, his sub 100 WRC plus.
Mm.
We saw some really bad at bats against lefties. We know that he's not a great defender out there. He's at best fringe average, and I would say for me, he's like a 40 glove, 45 glove. Now it's possible he gets better because, again, he does have the speed to play a better corner outfield than he does. But as we know with Jonathan Clase, it's not always about speed. It's about instinct and getting jumps on the ball and taking good routes and good angles. So we'll see. Canzone's off to a really good start this spring. We'll see if that carries over, and we'll see how much playtime he gets, because they're not going to just bench Mitch Haniger for weeks at a time. Like, they're not going to just bench Luke Raley for weeks at a time. He's kind of in this rotation with these two other guys, and obviously Dylan Moore will get some opportunities, particularly against lefties. So if Canzone breaks out in a way a lot of people are predicting, 25 homers, 115 WRC plus, he's probably a 3-win player, even with the defense. If it's just kind of what we saw last year, he's a fringe roster guy who still has upside, but he's, not a guy that you don't consider, going down to the minors and calling up Cade Marlowe or Samad Taylor or any of those guys to see if maybe they might fare better. So if Canzone is what people think he could be, the Mariners lineup very well could be 1 through 9, just like all above average hitters, which would be massive. Obviously, this would rely a lot on what happens at third base, but as well. But Canzone is a guy who carries a lot of upside, carries some question marks. And if he's really good, he gives you that another left-handed hitting power bat in this lineup that can really lengthen it and turn it from a, pretty good offense, I would say above average offense, to it could be great if Dom Canzone can be a 120 WRC plus guy this year. Now that's a big jump. That's like 50 points higher than he was last year, 50% better.
Yeah.
So it's a big jump, but it's there. The potential is there. So we'll see. And I don't love that they didn't build the roster where like Canzone was,
where he had to earn it.
Right. Now he probably has. He's had a really nice spring, and
he has.
He looks better. Like, he's thicker in the lower on the lower half, and like he just looks like he's more well put together.
Sure.
So it looks like he put in the work this winter, and so far it's showing in the results, and that's great. But we'll have to see. Canzone is the guy who could turn the Mariners offense from pretty good to really good if he is really good.
Yeah, he's the one position player that's currently set to make this roster out of camp that you don't really have any sort of history of production at the major league level. Even someone like Luke Raley had that first half last year. Again, the big issue with this offense in general is the injuries. There isn't a lot of performance risk in my mind, because a lot of these guys have done it, and they've done it recently. You're not really asking them to be anything that they haven't been, except for Canzone. Now, quickly, Mitch Haniger, Luke Raley, what are their ceilings, and what could they do for the Mariners this year if they hit those ceilings? And if they don't, if they bottom out, what does that do for the Mariners?
Raley's ceiling is what he did last year, 130 WRC plus, above league average on base, above league average slugging, above league average batting average. Not elite in any of those categories, but above average. He's going to swing and miss. He's going to strike out. That's going to be part of his game. He's going to hit home runs, and he'll steal a couple bags, and he'll play pretty decent defense in the outfield. So his ceiling is basically what he did last year. Just if he could be more consistent with it, then that would help out a lot. But even if he can't, even if he has a year exactly like he did last year, he's going to help you. Haniger's ceiling is really all based on health. There's very little doubt in my mind that he is still a 110 to 120 WRC plus type of bat. We know the power will play. So counting stats wise, who knows how often he's going to play, but I think, 250 about league average on base and probably high 400, low 500 slugging, certainly in the cards for Haniger. And Haniger has also looked great this spring, healthy.
Amazing.
Driving the ball to all fields. So we'll see how long he can stay healthy. There's a non-zero chance that he's able to give you 500 plate appearances, and you get 30 home runs and 100 RBI like he did in 2021. So it's certainly in the range of outcomes. It's just not super likely because of the injury history there.
unfortunately. But yeah,
Yeah.
Mitch looks very happy to be back in a Mariners uniform. He is swinging the
Mhm.
bat really, really well down in Peoria right now. All right, so we're going to continue talking about our seesaw players or swing players for the 2024 Mariners in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there is no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Conference tournaments are here, which means the biggest moments in college basketball are getting closer. Be a part of the action on Prize Picks for both men's and women's college basketball. And tonight in the pros, I'm taking Grady Dick more than 13.5 points against the Kings and Josh Giddey more than 11.5 points against the Jazz. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That is promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So yesterday, you may have seen on Twitter or on our community tab that the Mariners reached out to us about some comments Colby made towards the end of our Mailbag Monday episode this week. And again, while we thought it was made pretty clear that Colby was purely joking and never stated anything as fact and was more so talking about unpaid internships in a general manner, the Mariners did ask us to clarify that they do not have any unpaid positions within their organization. So it was not our intention to state otherwise as fact, and nothing we, or more specifically Colby, said regarding the Mariners internship positions were based on factual information. So just wanted to clear that up. Let's get back into the show. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, including myself. Find it tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So we've talked about Dom Canzone. We've talked about the corner outfielders. Now let's talk about the corner infielders. Let's talk about Josh Rojas and Luis Arias. Because that's obviously, outside of corner outfield, that's the biggest talking point with this roster right now. That's the biggest area of concern for a lot of people within the fan base right now. So the Mariners are making a bet, essentially. They moved on from Gino Suarez for a multitude of reasons. They are hoping that Luis Arias is closer to the guy that he was in 2021 and 2022 than he was in 2023. And they think that they've identified something here in Josh Rojas, who was pretty good in the second half after they acquired him. So if those guys hit their ceilings, what does that do for the Mariners? And if they bottom out, where do the Mariners go from there?
Sure. This one's a little sketchier than the corner outfield spot, because if the corner outfield doesn't work out, you still have Marlowe, you still have Samad Taylor, you still have some levers to pull there. And finding a third baseman in season is much harder than finding a corner outfielder. So this one's a little bit, it has a wider range of how it could help. Now, the beauty of it is, though, is that you really only need one of these guys to hit. If both of them do, it's a bonus. You have this really great 10th player that you can use, but you only need one. And so whichever one it was doesn't really matter. But both of these guys have very similar ceilings that they've already hit at the major league level. Both of these guys have 110 WRC plus seasons in their back pocket already. Both of these guys have 2-win seasons in their back pocket already. Rojas was almost a 3-win player in 2022. So yeah, the ceilings of these guys are probably 110 to 120 WRC plus. I think they both have about 20 home run power. Did Urias get there one year? Can't remember if he just fell short or not. Rojas certainly has shown that he has some power that the Diamondbacks either weren't willing to help him get to, or they decided that wasn't in the best interest, or maybe Rojas made a change. But the Mariners definitely identified something, and Rojas to me looks like he has 20 home run power with
Urias
600
had
plate
23.
appearances. There you go. So both about 20 home run power, both above average hitters, above average on base, and then you kind of see what you get with the slug. Rojas can steal some bags for you. Urias, not so much, but Urias can move around. He can play short. He can play second. So both of these guys' ceilings to me, 2.5, 3-win player. I would say like who has the higher ceiling? Probably Urias just because he's 26. So both of these guys, they could be 3-win players. They could be 2-win players. Like they've already done that in their career before. So I think their ceiling is solid everyday player that a lot of teams would like to have at second base. They just happen to play third base for the Mariners. So that's their ceiling. And their floor is, what they did last year. Both of those guys got hurt last year. Now Rojas was able to rebound a little bit after he got back from his hammy. And he really helped Seattle, especially in August, but he was fine in September. He came up with some big hits in September. Urias just could never really get going. And, that led to some, there were some reports that he had some confidence issues, more so than anything. And, I don't know if those reports are true. I've heard them. Doesn't really matter. He's coming to spring, got off to a slow start, had the shoulder thing. There were some reports about his, whether or not he was in shape. And, since then he's played third base on back-to-back days. He's making the throws. He's producing at the plate. Like he looks fine. He doesn't look out of shape or anything like that. Like to me, he looks like he's back to what he was. And Jerry was pretty much when he was on the show, he mentioned that like we targeted, Urias because he was a buy low. Essentially, he was the guy who got hurt last year and didn't rebound. We think he's a good player. We think he is what he was in 2021 and 2022. So, but their floors are that, they both do what they did last year, and the Mariners have like a 75-ish WRC plus at third base, and that's just not going to cut it. So all these guys have to do is be about league average to be fine. Honestly, they could probably be 90 WRC plus and the Mariners still be relatively fine, based on, how they make up for it at shortstop and center field and catcher. But I think their floors are, platoon guys, part-time guys, kind of Dylan Moore-ish. I think their ceilings are that they're both everyday players, and you're kind of trying to figure out how to get both of them in the lineup as often as you can without taking away at bats from Jorge Polanco and Mitch Garver at DH. And I think what would be great is if Rojas and Urias both hit so much that you start talking about giving Rojas some time in the outfield just to get his bat in the lineup. So, and he does have some experience out there. So, I think their ceilings are there. I think they both could be 3-win players. You only need one of them to be. And then I think their floors are that you have the potential to have a bit of a black hole because playing Dylan Moore every day at third base, not the answer. And there's just not a third baseman in the system right now that is chomping at the bit and ready to go and kind of step up and perform for you. So wider range of outcomes with these two, but I'm fairly confident that at least one of them will be solid all year.
But if the Mariners are wrong, it's going to be pretty hard for them to find a solution there mid-season, which is not really the case with the corner outfield because historically, and look, things change in the market year to year, but historically speaking, it's pretty easy and relatively cheap to go out and find a corner outfield, especially a 1-year stopgap type of player out
Mark
there.
Canna,
Whereas
Tommy Pham,
whereas
Tyler
at third
Naquin.
base, it's just like this offseason, not a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
So, we'll see how it goes, but the Mariners kind of have to be right about at least one of those guys this year. So, we're going to turn our attention to the other corner infield spot in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by GameTime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. GameTime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. So forget planning months in advance. GameTime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen as we talk about our Seesaw players for the 2024 Mariners. Ty France. Obviously went to Driveline. We know the whole deal. I don't need to go over it again. If you don't know what's been going on with Ty France this offseason, you've been living under a rock. If he figures it out, if he gets back on track, what is the ceiling? And if he bottoms out, what does that do for the Mariners?
Well, thankfully, the Mariners do have some levers to pull at first base. They have Luke Raley, who can definitely play first base. Dom Canzone has some brief history there, although it seems like that's not a lever they want to pull. You could defensively, you could fake it with Dylan Moore for a while, and maybe Ty Locklear. We'll see how he performs. If France is good, and by good, we just need 2021, 2022 Ty France. That makes the Mariners lineup 1 through 7 like really good. Like you're talking about JP, Julio, Polanco, Garver, Cal, France, I guess. And this is, by the way, if France is what he was in 2021, 2022, he's still probably the Mariners' 5th or 6th best hitter at that point. Like, how many teams have a lineup that is so deep that good Ty France wouldn't even get up until with 2 outs in the 2nd inning, So it would make the lineup one of the deepest in the game. It would also raise the floor of the entire operation. It would take more pressure off of the Julios, more pressure off of the Garbers, more pressure off of the Cals, that they don't have to do everything because we have this other guy who's been to an all-star game and, has 129 WRC plus as a career high. And it's different. Like, the lineup is just different. If Ty France is hitting 6th on a Wednesday night against John Gray or whatever, something's gone very well for the Mariners. And for Ty France. So France is a key. He's a massive, seesaw player. He might have the most sway over anybody in terms of which way the teeter-totter falls. Canzone might be up there just because we don't know what his ceiling is right now. And it feels like we know what France's ceiling is. But, there might be 25 home runs in Ty France still. There might be more power to go get. There might be a way that he can sustain a high 200s batting average and keep the on base skill and actually hit for more home runs. That's what he tried to do last year. He epically failed. Then it kind of looked like he tried to abandon ship halfway through the season, only to realize it doesn't really work that way. So he tried to hop back on that ship, and it was a mess. Last year was an absolute mess. There was no consistency whatsoever. France became one of the streakiest hitters in baseball, and it all ended up in him being like about a league average bat. You have to get more from your first baseman than a league average bat. So to me, France has to be a 120 WRC plus guy, or he's probably looking for a different employer next winter, because you're just not going to tender the guy $10 million contract if he's going to be a mediocre hitting first baseman. So France is a guy who can change things for you. He does it a little differently than the other right-handed hitters in this lineup too. He's not an exit velo guy, right? He's not a dead pull power guy. Like, he's a guy who at his best uses the whole field, hits the ball in the gaps, line drives in the gap, not fly balls in the gap where things go to die. Line drives, he'll chase, he'll expand the zone, but he'll still make contact and he'll push the ball through the right side. Like, France is just different. He looks different at his best than pretty much every other hitter in this lineup. He does things differently, but he still has to produce at the end of the day. And last year he got way outside of himself. He was trying to be something he wasn't, caught up to him. And now this year, he's talked about how his goal wasn't to get back to 2022 Ty France or whatever, but to find like a better player. That scares me a little bit, because that's literally what he tried to do last year and it failed. And think about it. If Ty France had the kind of season he did in 21 or 22 last year, the Seattle Mariners win the division.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's debatable. It's not, because what he would have done when you have Gino striking out, when you have Teo striking out, when you have Julio with his strikeout problem, you had Kelnick with his strikeout problems, you had Cal with his strikeout problems. Ty France, even at his worst, just doesn't strike out that much.
Yeah, he would have.
He's the guy who's in the middle of the lineup
that would have hit the fly ball. Balance. Yeah,
he would have hit the fly ball to score the guy from third. He would have hit the soft single through the wide open right side to get the guy from first to third. Like, that's what Ty France can bring when he's good. When he's not, you're relying a lot on guys who don't make a lot of contact to make a lot of contact. And there were times last year where the Mariners 2 through like 7 were striking out at a spectacular rate. And some of them were able to fix it. Julio cut his strikeouts down significantly throughout the year, but some of them weren't. Gino kept on striking out. Teo kept on striking out. And if you just had a guy in the middle who was just a good, solid hitter, right? Just exactly what Ty France had been for his entire career, you'd probably win a couple of those one-run games that you lost. And who knows? We might be talking about the Mariners as defending World Series champions if they get into the playoffs last year. That's the difference Ty France can make to your lineup. A good Ty France. So he's incredibly important to this whole operation. And that's why I'm a little concerned when he talks about like, oh, I'm not trying to get back to what I was. I'm trying to get to something I've never been. And it's like, yeah, that's what you were last year. Like it works both ways.
Right. Well, yeah, it kind of goes back to the Brant Brown conversation that we've talked about and just this roster in general, the conversation around this roster, and that you're not in a position where you're having to ask guys to be something that they've never been before. And you don't need France to be something that he's never been before. You just need him to be good Ty France again, who's a guy that's going to put the ball in play a lot. And he's going to find grass a lot because of that. Now, that's not, the traditional production you want out of first base, but I'd rather have that than him chasing 25 home runs and swinging and missing a lot, which is not a part of his game.
I mean, I think we all remember a strikeout against Texas last year where the ball was almost outside of the other batter's box and he flailed at it. Like that's not like Ty France will expand the zone, but not to that degree. And he actually makes contact when he expands the zone. Like he's a good bad ball hitter. Nobody's good enough to hit the pitches he was swinging at last year. So yeah, it was a disaster last year. It was bad. Like I know he finished the year at like 103 WRC plus. So disaster seems like a strong word when you consider what the Mariners needed Ty France to be desperately and what he was unable to do for them. It ended up being a disaster, and that's how you miss the playoffs by a game or two.
So lastly, let's talk Bryce Miller. Let's talk Bryan Woo, because we already feel very good about, the 1, 2, 3 in this rotation. We talked about them, a lot yesterday. But beyond those two guys, you have Miller, you have Woo, who sky's the limit for both of those guys.
Sure. Ceilings for both of those guys, I think for 2024 specifically, mid-rotation starters, number 3s, those are the ceilings. The floor is that, the league has a book on these guys now, particularly for Woo. He didn't appear to add any new pitches or anything like that. It looks like the same guy. And both of them struggle, or one of them struggles, and they're kind of fringy number 5 starters. And now you have to go and you have to make a decision between Bryan Woo and Emerson Hancock, which, gross. Like you don't have the starting pitching depth for really one of these guys to take a huge step back. And if both of them do, you might be screwed. So these two guys, they matter a lot.
Yeah, because the alternative is probably trading decent to really good prospect capital for a pitcher.
Right. And good luck finding starting pitching in July. We know how hard that is. So, especially with pretty much every team still being a contender when the deadline rolls around. So it's just one of those things where, if they both reach their ceiling, the Mariners have the best rotation in baseball. It's not close. They're going to win the division. If they are what they are last year, fine. The Mariners have a shot. They still have a shot. If one of them takes a step and the other one takes a step back, you're still in okay shape. Like ideally you want both of them to take a step forward. I think
if you have 4 guys, if you have 4 legit dudes, like if Miller, Woo takes that step forward and another guy takes a step back, okay, I can live with my number 5 not being in a great spot.
Right. Finding a number 5 starter is easier than finding, a number 3 or a number 4 even, or 2 of them.
I can probably go get this year's Tyler Anderson for a Carter Benz type of prospect.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's just one of those things where both of the guys take steps forward. Best rotation in baseball. It's not close. World Series caliber rotation. If both of those guys kind of stay what they were last year, more or less, with maybe just a few more bulk innings thrown in there, still one of the best rotations in baseball. Still could, win playoff series, go to the World Series, blah, blah, blah. both of those guys take a step forward, you might not win 85 games, like, because you just don't have the pitching depth behind them to absorb losing both of them. And it doesn't necessarily mean losing them to injury, but just, losing their production a little bit. So, um, they're going to throw strikes. We know that. Like, that's not an issue. They're going to get fastball value. But what else can they do? What other wrinkles are they adding this year so that the league doesn't just sit on the fastball all year, and the Mariners struggle to get 5-6 innings out of these guys on a regular basis? So yeah, there's a huge variance there with the pitchers, but I do think they carry relatively high floors. So I do think last year's kind of the floor for them, but you never know. If just one thing goes wrong, you're in pretty big trouble there. If two things go wrong, you might be screwed.
Both of these guys need to figure out how to get lefties out with some form of consistency. Woo more so than Miller, but Miller didn't have a great time against lefties this past year either. Hopefully the splitter helps. Hopefully the splitter is, first of all, real. That's going to have to be a legit weapon against lefties for him. And then, Woo's, we'll see. Because again, it doesn't seem like Woo's added anything. So we'll see what he's tweaked at the very least.
Neither guy has to be good against lefties, but you can't turn every single lefty you face into Corey Seager. So you got to find some middle ground here.
All right. So that is going to do it for our show. Let me remind myself, what are we doing tomorrow? Tomorrow we're doing over-unders. So I'm going to present some over-unders to Colby, get his thoughts on those. Colby's going to present some over-unders to me, get my thoughts on those. We'll have some fun. We're in the midst of our opening day prep, so a lot of prediction shows, a lot of all that kinds of stuff. So hope you guys are enjoying it. Hope you guys enjoyed yesterday's show. Hope you guys enjoyed this show. And then of course on Friday we got Flag Day, where we're going to be planting our flag in 5 Mariners each. Should be a lot of fun. But for now, that's going to do it for our show. Before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the Fire TV channels app, which is, of course, free. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day. We'll see you next time. Peace.